A mother returned home early to surprise her daughter, but saw something she would never forget. Sometimes the truth hides right under your nose. Behind closed doors, behind ordinary smiles in seemingly safe places. When Sara decided to surprise her daughter and returned home a day early, she couldn't even imagine what a nightmare would unfold behind those doors. What she saw was only the first layer of what she was about to discover. Sara Bennett sat in her car, holding a paper cup of coffee. It was a little after 10 a.m., and according to her schedule, she was still supposed to be at her shift at the Chicago clinic. But today, a rare opportunity arose to leave early. The resident had arrived early, and Sara, without telling her daughter, decided to return home. She wanted to arrange a little surprise for Elly, have breakfast together, maybe go get some ice cream, buy some new paints. Elly loved to paint. Sara inserted the key into the lock and entered, trying to be quiet. "Elly," she called, receiving no answer. "Surprise, I'm home." The house was strangely quiet. Sara walked deeper, listening. The curtains in the living room were closed and smelled of something stale. Dirt. She went upstairs to her daughter's room. The door was closed. Sara knocked on Elly's door. The sun shone. She opened the door faintly. The girl was lying in bed, covered with a blanket over her head. The fan was on. Although it was cool in the house, "Elly, are you sick?" There was no answer. Sara came closer, sat down on the edge of the bed, and touched her daughter's shoulder. She flinched and abruptly hid her hand. "Hey, it's okay. I did it quietly," Sara said. "I just wanted to surprise you. I got the day off today." Elly slowly peered out from under the blanket. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. Sara felt her insides tighten. "Have you been crying?" "No, too quickly." Elly replied, "I just wasn't sleeping. Something happened." "Problems at school?" "No." Sara noticed that her daughter was holding her hand somehow, unnaturally, as if hiding it. She gently took her wrist. The blue mark wasn't just a light trace, but a deep one with a yellow and blue tint on her wrist, as if someone was holding her tightly. "Where did this come from?" "I fell," Sara muttered. She frowned. She knew her daughter, Elly. She was never one to fall or get bruises. She was careful. Careful. "Where did you fall at school on the stairs?" Sara froze for a second. Something didn't add up. Elly, her gaze didn't add up. She looked more than just scared. She was scared to the core. Sara pressed her palm to her daughter's forehead. "Her temperature is normal." "Elly, look at me there." She slowly raised her eyes. "Someone hurt you." Long silence. Elly nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly. Sara's heart was pounding. She tried not to show it, not to scare it. Someone from school nodded again, but this time it was negative. Sara felt her breath catch in her throat. Dozens of possibilities flashed in her head. "Who? Can you tell me who it is?" Elly whispered, and then, "Please don't." "Don't make Elly," he said. "If I tell him, he'll do something to you." Sara felt her head buzzing. "Who is he?" She hugged her daughter, feeling her shudder. "No one will hurt me. Listen, I'll protect you." Elly remained silent. She was shaking all over, as if under a sheet. Electric current. Sara went down to the kitchen. Her hands were shaking. She poured herself some water. She sat down at the table, wondering who she might suspect. Was there anyone in their circle who caused her even the slightest doubt? She remembered Josh, the neighbor across the street, an old widower friend of the family. He helped around the house, fixing the faucet, installing shelves. He sometimes took Elly away from school. When Sara was on duty, he always smiled, was overly polite, was too convenient. And then an episode popped into Sara's head. A few weeks ago, she walked into Elly's room, and she quickly removed something from her tablet screen. She didn't pay it any mind. And then her daughter asked her several times not to leave her home alone. Sara took out her phone and dialed Mark's number. Stevens, a police officer she knew. They had been friends since college, and he always said, "If you feel something is wrong, better to be safe than sorry." "Mark. Hello. I need help. Very serious, just between you and me." He didn't ask any unnecessary questions. He said, "I'll be there in half an hour." Sara went upstairs. Elly was asleep. There were traces of tears on her face, even in her sleep. Her lips were pursed, as if she were expecting a blow. Sara sat down next to her and stroked her hair. She didn't know all the details, but she felt it. The truth was worse than she could imagine. And she swore whoever it was, he would never harm her child again. And if the system couldn't stop him, she would do it herself. Sara couldn't sleep after Eli's revelations inside. Everything was turned upside down. Her daughter lived in fear. Every day, every night, and she didn't notice, didn't hear, was nearby. And yet, blind, the next morning, Sara went out into the garden to talk to Mark. He had come as a civilian. Without a uniform, he didn't want to scare Elly. Sara told him the little she had managed to understand. There was an adult man in the neighborhood, possibly. Eli was already afraid to say his name. He said he had threatened to harm Sara. Mark listened silently. Do you have a suspicion? He finally asked. Sara hesitated, but still answered. Josh. Hayden. Our neighbor. You know him. He often does. I used to help here. When I was at work. Polite, bypass Elly. I remember this guy. There was one strange episode a few years ago. A complaint from a family from another area, but it didn't go to court. The girl's mother dropped the case. All the claims were closed due to lack of evidence. Officially, clean, unofficially. Questionable. Do you think he could? I think so. We need to be very careful and start collecting any evidence. Sara entered Elly's room. The girl was sitting. There was a box of drawings on the floor next to her. She was silently sorting through them, as if searching for something. Sara sat down next to Elly. I know it's hard for you, she said. We need to understand who I am. I need to know who to be afraid of. He'll find out what I told him. My voice was as quiet as the rustle of paper. He won't know. I won't tell anyone. Your name, and you can talk to me. Only when you're ready. But the longer we remain silent, the longer he's free. And he shouldn't be free. You understand? Elly nodded, and something inside her seemed to be Josh whispered this. He started with compliments, then started coming when you weren't there. He said, that if I tell you, you'll die? He knows how Sara felt. It felt like she'd been punched in the gut. She barely restrained herself from jumping up and running straight to his house. Have you ever touched you, girl, again? Sara nodded. She covered her hand with hers. They sat in silence for so long that night. Sara watched the video from the installations around the perimeter of the house. Most of the footage was blank. Dogs, children, delivery people. But in the last week, there were 3 episodes where it was clearly visible. Josh approaches the house late at night. He doesn't ring the doorbell. He just stands at the door. He walks around the house once and appears. He leaves at the back door a few minutes later. Sara saved these fragments and forwarded them to Mark. An hour later, he called back. This isn't enough for an arrest yet. I'll start with a report to open a case. Record the video. Suspicious behavior. What else can you do? I'll try to get a warrant for his phone or laptop if we find anything there. Will there be any serious reason? He knows we suspect something, but not yet. But believe me, people like him sense danger. He'll start to panic soon. He might try to hide, put pressure on her, change her behavior. So you need to be vigilant and don't leave her alone. The next day, Elly didn't go to school. Sara called the office and took the day off. They spent the whole day at home making pancakes. They watched old cartoons. They talked about trivial things. Sara tried to create a sense of security. Although everything was seething inside, Sara looked at her tablet with permission. The girl said you could look. There was a message there. I didn't delete everything. Sara opened the conversation. A lot had been erased, but a few fragments remained. Phrases from an anonymous account. They were cautious, but that didn't stop them. Only, it's scarier. You don't want your mother to get hurt. No one will believe it, though. They'll say you made it all up. If you keep quiet, everything will be fine. We friends. The screenshots were sent to Mark. He confirmed it by IP address. We can try to identify the sender, especially if it was linked to his main account. We're close, he said, but it's important not to rush. We'll hurry. The lawyer will dismiss the case. Now your task is to maintain stability. Protect her. Don't let him know that we're building a network. Sara nodded, but fury was already boiling inside her, and if the police couldn't stop him, she would do it herself in 2 days. Sara was sitting in the police station in the interrogation room, next to Mark in front of the woman. Juvenile detective, Lieutenant Harper, Eli, hadn't been brought in yet. Sara insisted that her daughter be interrogated, only in the presence of a child psychologist, and only if absolutely necessary. On the table lay a flash drive with a video recording, screenshots of the correspondence, and a scan of a medical examination conducted by a doctor she knew at a private clinic. Everything was done according to the rules, marks on the body, description of the condition, psychiatrist's report, trauma, anxiety, signs of systematic Harper's intimidation. Looked through the materials silently, only making notes. You finally understand. She spoke up. If we're wrong, if it turns out this is a misunderstanding, we will ruin someone's life. Sara straightened up abruptly. And if he's right, if we do nothing and he harms someone else or goes back to my daughter. Harper looked at her straight. That's exactly why I'm working on this case. But we need to do the verses strictly according to protocol. Mark intervened. Disturbing actions, video, circumstantial evidence of this is sufficient to begin surveillance, request a warrant for an electronic device, interrogate him. For now, as a witness, Harper nodded. Let's start with this, but be prepared. It may take time. Sara returned home late. That evening, Elly was already asleep. She quietly went into her room to check if the VS was okay. A fox-shaped night light was burning on the windowsill. Her beloved, Ish, was next to her pillow for a moment. For a moment, the VS seemed normal, ordinary. But only for a moment. Sara didn't sleep. Almost all night, every rustle seemed suspicious. She held her phone with her, the remote control for the alarm in her other hand. Towards morning, she finally dozed off on the couch in her clothes. A call woke her up. It's me. Mark's voice rang out. He felt that something was wrong. Who Josh was this morning. They slandered him and are trying to paint him as a rapist. He behaved aggressively and threatened complaints. Damn, Sara exhaled. He now knows we're digging into him unofficially. Yes, but that only strengthens our position. We received permission to search his home and electronics tomorrow morning. We'll go with a warrant. The main thing is to hold out. Sara wanted to ask last night if he could come stay nearby, but Mark had already risked his career helping her outside protocol. I can handle it, she said, for Elly's sake. I can't handle it. The night was especially difficult. First, Sara heard a sound in the hallway. A floorboard creaked, then outside the windows. A silhouette flashed. The alarm was silent. She checked the cameras, too. Everything was fine, but the feeling of anxiety didn't subside until closer to midnight. Someone knocked on the kitchen window. Sara, holding a kitchen knife in her hands. She carefully approached, and a shadow peeked out. He said he'd be there in 20 minutes. He ordered, barricade the doors and don't open them to anyone. When he arrived, they walked around the area. There were no traces, but Sara. She was sure it was him checking. How prepared they were. The next morning at 6 a.m., the police came to Josh with a warrant. Sara didn't see the arrest, but Mark called. They immediately took him without resistance. Under the pretext of storing materials, potentially compromising him, including Elly. He thought he'd deleted everything, but we've restored it. So that's it. This is just the beginning. There will be a trial, but you can breathe a sigh of relief for now. He won't come near your family. Sara hung up the phone, and for the first time in recent days, she quietly cried, alone. Not from fear, but from the fact that, finally, something had shifted. When she told Elly, the girl only nodded. No tears, no smile, her face empty. She sat at the table, drawing with a black pen, something like a castle with high walls. Sara asked, "Is it you?" Elly nodded. "It's me inside." Sara hugged her and held her close. She knew the worst was probably behind her, but the real fight was still ahead in Sara's house. It became quieter again, but not safer. Despite Josh's arrest, the anxiety didn't let up. She knew how the system worked. No warrant, no sentence, temporary detention, no defense. Josh was being held for 48 hours. If, by that time, the prosecutor doesn't file a charge with solid evidence, he'll be released on bail. That's exactly what happened. Mark called her on the second day. He left at sunset under supervision, but without a bracelet. The court hasn't yet approved a restriction on movement. He knows that. He's in trouble, but for now he remains free. What does this mean? Sara clutched her phone as if she could break it. This is a sign. Already with a request for emergency security. But the process isn't quick until the alarm goes off. Locks and don't be alone. Sara didn't tell him that they were already. There were no relatives nearby, no friends who could be trusted with such a situation. They also locked the doors, turned on the windows, the security system, but the feeling that someone was nearby never left that night. As with the room, Sara was next to her. Something would happen, and that something had happened. At 3:41 a.m., the alarm went off. There was the sound of breaking glass. The back door. Sara jumped up, clutching her phone and pepper spray. She rushed to the window and saw a figure. They were piercing her clothes, a hood, something glittering in her hand. She darted into the room. Elly locked herself in and called Mark. He broke into the house. I'm on my way. The police have been on the line for 5 minutes. Sara hugged Elly close. Quiet. You and I, we're not alone. Slow footsteps were heard, a knock on the wall, the click of a lock on the first floor, and Sara's voice. Open up. I just want to talk. It's all a mistake. His voice was distorted, deaf as if from the depths of water. Sara covered Elly's ears with her hands. She was shaking not from fear, but from tension as footsteps rose to the second floor. I know you're there, and no one will help you. You shouldn't have interfered, Sara. We could have lived like before. He tried to open the door. It was closed. He started slamming his shoulder against it. Sara had already raised the canister and was squeezing the alarm button on the remote control with her other hand. The button should have sent a backup call to the remote control. Get away from the door, Josh. She screamed. The police are already on their way. He didn't. Only he answered. One blow, and everything went quiet. A second, another silence, then a crash. Glasses in the hallway. Something creaked as they fell. Footsteps running down. 40 seconds later, the wail of sirens was heard. Josh was detained right on the lawn. He tried to escape through the neighbor's yard, but was in shock. He had a knife and gloves on him. He screamed that he wanted everything. Just to explain that it was all revenge, envy, that she had ruined his life at the police station, this time for an attempted illegal entry with a weapon, threats, and violating the terms of his release. This wasn't just psychological pressure anymore. It was a real physical risk. Mark burst into the house about 10 minutes after the police. He looked at Sara and Elly completely. Sara nodded. During the entire time, she extended her arms and hugged him. The morning was spent at the police station, interrogations, signing protocols. Sara felt like a machine. She answered questions, signing papers, nodding. The only thing that kept her grounded was Elly's hand, squeezing her fingers. By lunchtime, Josh's official confirmation had arrived. They were arrested. The court ruled to keep him in custody. We won the first battle, Mark said, but there's a long, painful process ahead. Are you ready? Sara looked at Elly. The girl was sleeping in her lap for the first time in many days. With a relaxed face. We're not ready, but we'll fight tonight. They returned home. The house was empty, but it no longer seemed so dangerous. Sara knew that she now had protection, but even more so, the will to protect herself. She couldn't return what was stolen from her daughter, but she could be there every day. And Elly had said, "Thank you for listening to me, Mom," for a long time before bed. 3 months had passed. The trial of Josh Hayden proceeded as usual. Prosecutors had gathered sufficient evidence, and the judge denied bail. The case was transferred to the district court, where a full trial was to begin. Elly didn't give direct testimony in the courtroom. The prosecutor insisted that her interrogation be conducted via video link in the presence of a psychologist. She answered questions with sufficient restraint, despite her fear afterward. She left the session with a straight face, not as a winner, but as someone who was no longer a victim. Sara sold her car, quit her job, and cut back on all her expenses. She understood that her main priority now was being there for her daughter. They went to a therapist together every week. Family and individual sessions were held. Elly, at first, barely spoke, only drew. Explain this to. Dialogue. Simply, not in words. One day, Sara noticed how color appeared in one of the drawings. First, pale blue, then yellow, then green, and once, pink. Is that a fox? She asked, pointing to the drawing. No, Elly said. It's me. Sara held back her tears at Elly's school. At first, she studied remotely, then switched to part-time. She attended classes twice a week. The teachers were warned. Nothing was explained to her classmates. At first, the girl kept to herself. But one day, during literature class, when they were discussing where monsters live, Elly raised her hand and said that sometimes the monster isn't outside, but nearby. And no one understood what she was talking about, but after class, a girl approached her and simply said, "You're strong." That was the first step. Mark didn't disappear. He continued to help, be there. Not as a cop, but as a friend. He often picked them up. On weekends, he cooked. ate burgers on the grill, drove them to the park. Sara saw her daughter, laugh for the first time in a long time. Truly, without a shadow of fear, without a defensive mask, and it was during this period that Sara developed a new purpose. She didn't want to return to the hospital. Her calling changed. She began attending local support groups for mothers, survivors. Began talking a couple of weeks later. A woman approached her after a meeting and said, "The way you tell it is as if you are telling my story. Thank you." That's how the Shaky Project came into being, a small, non-profit initiative that Sara launched together with two other women. They helped mothers and children, held meetings. They visited schools, were trained to recognize warning signs. Mark brought in his colleagues. Volunteer lawyers appeared, and soon they were talked about. Even on the city news blog in the spring. Elly came to Sara with a statement. "I want to go back to school full-time and to art class." Sara didn't answer right away. Her heart filled with both joy and anxiety, but she only nodded. "Of course. Only if you're ready." "I'm ready." And she really was ready at the school exhibition. Her work took third place. There was a girl standing on the edge, and behind her, a huge figure of a woman, almost transparent as a shadow in the corner, a signature. "Mom, my shield." Sara held her diploma and couldn't stop crying while the trial was going on. While Josh was in prison. While life is getting better. Sara understood that the main evil doesn't disappear even if it's punished. It can take other forms, other people. But now she knew how to recognize it. And, most importantly, she was no longer a lone daughter. Friends nearby, those she can now help. And when Elly walked past Sara, she said, "I love you again." Sara realized this wasn't the end, it was the beginning.